There is a wonderful sefer which is called Migdal Oz. It's actually the sefer that I'm holding now in my hands, and it's very phenomenal. Migdal Oz, Oz is spelled Ayin Zayin, which is the initials of one of the greatest chassidim of our generation. His name was Reb Azriel Zelig Slonim. He was in Yerushalayim, but in his youth he learned in Lubavitch, in the original Lubavitch. He was also a Einikol of the Alter Rebbe, a descendant from the Alter Rebbe. And interesting enough, he was perhaps the first shliach from the Rebbes, actually of the previous Rebbe still, that visited all the 5 continents. We're talking about in the 20s. He learned in Lubavitch in the early 1900s. The previous Rebbe became the Rebbe in 1920. And within those first 10, 15 years, he visited literally Australia, New Zealand, America. He was the first one, I believe, that went around. And he passed away in 1972, Tafshel Lamed Beis. In his memory, in his honor, they gave out a beautiful sefer, which has a lot of very, very interesting information, historical, about all different kinds of issues, very, very interesting manuscripts. One of the details that caught my eye many years ago, and I always had a question on it, and the sikha that we'll be doing today hopefully will shed some light to it. It's here on page Taf Reish Chav Zayin. As you can see, you see it right in front. You see there's 2 manuscripts, one on the top and one on the bottom. The manuscript on the top is from the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe. The manuscript on the bottom is from the previous Rebbe, from the 6th Rebbe. And the 6th Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, is explaining what is that note from the Rebbe Rashab. This is an internal memo that the Rebbe Rashab wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe. This was in the times of the yeshiva in Lubavitch. The previous Rebbe was the Menahel Poyel. He was the director of the yeshiva, the principal. Anybody who wanted to get accepted into the yeshiva had to go through the previous Rebbe. The zettel, this little note on top, this internal memo, is from the Rebbe Rashab that says, you should make an exception and accept this child into the yeshiva. And then the Rebbe Rashab writes on the bottom, Lisraif hatzettel hazeh, that I want this zettel, this little note, to be destroyed, to be burnt. Not only it wasn't burnt, but under it, there's a whole explanation from the previous Rebbe, the whole story, what happened over here. He gives the whole background, that there was a lady who came to Lubavitch. She was a widow, and she had 2 sons. One was an older one was a younger one, and the older one fit into the system, the younger one didn't. And the previous Rebbe did not want to accept him because he didn't have any place for him in that setting. And the kid was crying for a few days. And then the Rebbe Rashab saw him, and he asked him, why are you crying? So he said, because I want to remain a Frum Yid, and I don't have a place in the yeshiva. To make a long story short, the Rebbe Rashab asked the Frierdiker Rebbe to accept him, and of course the Frierdiker Rebbe accepted him. And my question was always, if the Rebbe Rashab says, Lisref hatzettel hazeh, that you have to burn this zettel, how is it that the previous Rebbe, not only he didn't burn it, but he even has a whole explanation of what the history is behind it? Which means that the Frierdiker Rebbe cherished this zettel, and he really felt that there's a lot of learning that we pull out from this. And the question is, what is it? So we're going to learn a sikha on Parshas Vayakhel, and perhaps that will shed some light to it. I think some beautiful light. Parshas Vayakhel and Pekudei, let's just give a little bit of a background to what the sikha is about, are basically a repetition of the Parshias of Truma and Tetzaveh. In other words, like this. In Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh that we read 4 and 5 weeks ago, are the Parsha Truma discusses where Hashem says all the utensils and furniture and the Mishkan, the structure of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. That's Parsha Truma. The Aron, the Ark, the Menorah, the Shulchan, the table that contained the Lechem Aponim, the Chalas, the Matzahs, and the altar, etc. The next parsha, Parsha Tetzaveh, is the parsha that discusses the garments of the Kohanim and the korbanos, several sacrifices that they had to bring in order to inaugurate the Mishkan, etc. Parshas Vayakhel and Pekudei are basically repetition. Parshas Vayakhel is where it discusses how the Yidden actually did the Mishkan with its utensils, with all the furniture. And Parshas Pekudei is where it discusses the garments of the Kohanim and those certain sacrifices that they did. So let's go into our source. This is going to be based on Likutei Sichos, volume 31, Garelik Lamed Aleph, on pages 200 till 202. So let's go directly to our sources here. And the Torah says as follows. Go to source number 1. In Parshas Vayakhel, Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Daled. After the Torah says that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered the Yidden, and this was after the story of the Egel, and after Yom Kippur, etc. So Moshe Rabbeinu is calling all the Yidden, and he's telling them, here, I'm going to tell you now what the Rebbe said regarding building the Mishkan. So first he told them the laws of Shabbos. We're not going to go now into it. Why did he tell them the laws of Shabbos here? And also we are not going to be discussing why did the Torah have to repeat 2 parshas. The Torah could have just said that the Yidden did what the Rebbe told them to do in Parshas Truma and Tetzaveh. Because for that there's another whole Sicha, in Likutei Sichos Garelik Aleph, and in other places. We're just going to go to one detail here in the parsha. So, let's go back to our source number 1. Vayakhel Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Daled. The Torah says as follows. Vayomer Moshe kol adas b'nei Yisrael lemer. Moshe Rabbeinu said to all the Yidden as follows. Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem lemer. This is the thing that the Rebbe commanded as follows. Pasuk Hey. K'chu me'itchem truma l'Hashem. Take from amongst you a donation for the Eibishter. Kol nediv liboy. Anybody who is generous, who is a generous-hearted person, Yevieho es trumas Hashem, should bring this offering to the Eibishter, Zahav v'chesef u'nechoshes, gold, silver, and copper. Pasuk Vav, the Torah continues, Usecheles v'argamom v'telas shani, blue wool, purple wool, a red thread, and then the Torah says about the oires elim, the skins from the rams that they needed to cover the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan, shemen lamoir, oil for the menorah, samim, the incense, the spices. This is what it says in Pasuk Vav. Then in Pasuk Yud, the Torah says, Bechol chacham leiv bachem, and anyone who is an expert, who is talented, who is wise-hearted, Yavoyu v'yasu eiskal hashesiv Hashem. They should come and do everything that the Rebbe commanded. What did the Rebbe command? Pasuk Yud Aleph, Es ha-mishkan, they should put up the Mishkan, Es ahaloi, the roof, and as Rashi will explain later what does Mishkan mean, Ves michsehu, and the cover, Es ha'aron, the ark, Es ha'shulchan, Es menorah samoir, the table, the menorah, etc. Let's look what Rashi says on Pasuk Hey. Go to source number 2. The Pasuk Hey said, the Rebbe said, anyone who is wise-hearted should bring a offering. Says Rashi, go to source number 2 in Pasuk Hey, Nediv liboy. What does it mean? He is kind-hearted. Says Rashi, Al Shem Sheli Boy Nodvoi, because it is his heart that makes him desire to do this offering. Karini Divlev, he's called a heart gracious person, generous person. Then Rashi makes a statement, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today. Rashi says, Kvar pirashti ha-mishkan u'melachtoi b'mokim tzavaosam. I already explained the Mishkan and everything that had to be done with the Mishkan over there where the Rebbe commanded. In other words, in Parashat Truma, I already explained everything about the Aron, the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Mishkan, the coverings, etc. So here I do not have to repeat it. And that is why Take in Parshas Vayakhel and Pekudei, we see that there are much, much less Rashis than in other Parshas. And as a matter of fact, we see Take. As we go through the Psukim, we see that if Rashi does explain something, he's not explaining a repetition of what he said before. He's explaining something that if Rashi wouldn't explain it here, we wouldn't understand it. For example, go to source number 3, Pasuk Yudalev, the Rebbe just says that I want you to make as ha-mishkan, to make the mishkan. Says Rashi, when the Torah says over here the word mishkan, it doesn't mean the whole mishkan, the whole tabernacle. What does it mean, says Rashi? When a person walked into the mishkan, he saw there was a covering. Really, there were 3 coverings, one on top of the other. But which one did the person see? The lower one. Says Rashi, that the lower is the one that's called Mishkan. Kuruyun Mishkan, they are the one that's called Mishkan. So therefore Rashi has to explain over here, where the Torah says as ha-Mishkan, that it means the covering of the Mishkan. And we wouldn't have figured that out from the previous parshas. So we have a klal. Rashi does not repeat himself here in Parshas Vayakhel on something that he already explained before. But if that's the case, then we're going to have a massive question. Go to source number 4. We're going to see something that Rashi is repeating himself, what is already explained in Parshat Truma. What is it? Go to source number 4, Pasuk Ches. The Pasuk says, Es yizdois ha-mishkan, the pegs of the Mishkan. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Ves yizdois ha-chatzir, and the pegs for the courtyard. Ves misreihem, and their ropes. What it means is as follows. The Mishkan had coverings made out of cloth, skins, cloth, etc. The courtyard didn't have walls, it had beams, and between the beams you had these drapes, these curtains. How did these things stay and didn't move from the wind? They had ropes, and at the end they had pegs, and this is what kept them down. So one of the things that the Yidden had to make was these pegs and the ropes. Says Rashi, what does this mean? Look in source number 5. Yeseidos. What was the purpose of these pegs, like these big nails? Like when you have a tent, so you have the pegs at the end to keep the tent down. Says Rashi, Yeseidos liskoya veliksher bahem, to insert them and to tie with them soifei hayiriyos, the ends of the drapes of the curtains, ba'aretz, in the ground, sheloyonu baruach, that they shouldn't sway in the wind. What does meisreihem mean? Says Rashi, chavolim liksher. It means the ropes that they use to tie. So comes the obvious question. It seems like that the way Rashi explains it, that we're talking about pegs and ropes, that before we didn't know this. Well, we're going to go back to Parshat Truma. We're going to see that Rashi already explained it perfectly. Let's see. Go to source number 6. This is the last pasuk in Parshat Truma. Perik Chav Zayin, Pasuk Yotes, says the Pasuk, Lechoil kelei mishkan, to all the kelim, all the utensils of the Mishkan, Bechol avidosei, everything that had to be done with there, Bechol yesei doisav, and all its pegs, Bechol yizdeis hachatzer, and all the pegs also for the courtyard, Nechoshes, are made out of copper. What is this yesei dois? Explains Rashi. Go to source number 7, Rashi. Yeseidos, what does it mean? Pegs. Keminigre nechoshes, they were like copper nails. Asuyin leyiriyos oihel, they're made for the coverings of the oihel, of the Mishkan. Ulekal eyachatzer, and for the drapes, the curtains that were also in the courtyard. Kshurim b'meisarim saviv saviv b'shipuleim, they are tied down all around, from the bottom, with cord, with rope. Why? Kedei shelei tehei haruach magbihosan, so the wind is not going to pick them up. And then Rashi adds another interesting point. Ve'eini yedeya, the only thing which I'm not sure, says Rashi, im tchuvim ba'aretz, if they are connected into the ground, or oikshurin utluyin, or they are just hanging, these pegs, ve'koivdon, and their weight, machbir shipulei hayiriyos, keeps down the bottom of the curtains, shloyonu baruach, that they shouldn't move around in the wind. So we see that Rashi explains very, very well what is Yeseidos and what is Meisreim. That it means the pegs, it means the rope. The only thing that over here Rashi is not sure if they are actually stuck into the ground or they are weight. But otherwise, we know what they are. So the question is, why does Rashi repeat himself in Parshas Vayakhel? Then Rashi continues in Parshat Truma. And he adds another interesting twist. Ve'oimerani, and I think, sheshmon meichiach alein, that their name, by calling them Yeseidos, that indicates, it points out what they are. Shehem tkuim ba'aris, that we're talking about pegs that get stuck into the ground. They're not a concept of weight. That lekach nikru Yeseidos, and that's why they're called Yeseidos. Umikra zeh mesayeni, and I actually have a pasuk that will help me out over here. That brings me a proof. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, Oyhel bal yitzon, bal yisa yeseidoisav lo netzach. That this is a tent that doesn't move. Why? Because the pegs will never be taken out. So we see here clearly that in Parshat Truma, Rashi explains what are Yeseidos umesarim. So how come over here in Parshas Vayakhel, Rashi has to repeat himself? This is question number one. Then comes question number two. We're not going to go now through the whole Rashi over there in Truma, because there's another whole Sikha from the Rebbe in Likutei Sichas Chelik Vav in Parshat Truma about that Rashi. By the way, a very, very interesting point here. We may have discussed it in the past already also. The Rebbe started this whole concept of learning Rashi Sichas in 1965. When his mother, the Rebbetzin Chana, passed away. She passed away on Vav Tishrei, was right after, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on Shabbos Shuvah. And then afterwards, after Simchas Torah, 2 weeks later, the Rebbe started Farbringing on Shabbos Bereishis, and he Farbringed every single Shabbos that year, and the Rebbe started then the concept of learning Rashi on Chumash. And many times the Rebbe would take the first Rashi in the Parsha and the last Rashi in the Parsha. As a matter of fact, in Chelik Vav, the Rebbe discusses the last pasuk in Parshat Truma, which is taken from the year of Tavshich Chav Hei, the year when the mother passed away. So we're not going to go through that whole Rashi, but just one interesting point here. There are two opinions in the Sfarim, in the prints of Rashi, whether the second half of Rashi, where Rashi says that, first he says, I'm not sure whether the pegs were stuck into the ground or it was just heavy. That is for sure from Rashi. That second half, where Rashi says that I think that it means that they were in the ground because I have a pasuk that proves that to me. Some say that this is something that Rashi himself added, and some say no, that it was one of the Talmidim of Rashi, one of the students of Rashi, or perhaps even later than that, one of the printers, when he saw that Rashi says that he's not sure if it's this or that, the printer says, what do you mean you're not sure? There's a pasuk. So the pasuk makes it very clear that it's stuck into the ground. So there are two versions here. Whichever way we look at it, it seems that the Rashi in Parshat Teruma remains with this Ve'eni Yadeya. He's not sure if they are stuck into the ground. Even later when he says that, even if we say that that second half is also from Rashi, still he doesn't refute what he says before, that I'm not sure. He leaves that in his Pirush. That means that Rashi remains with that thing that he's not sure in Parshat Teruma. All of a sudden, when it comes to the Parshas Vayakhel, Rashi makes it very clear, as we said before in source number 3, that they are made to stick into the ground, that they are made to stay there. So why is it that in Parshat Teruma, Rashi is not sure what it is? All of a sudden, we come here in Parshas Vayakhel, Rashi is very clear what happened to these pegs. So we have two questions already. Number one, why does Rashi repeat himself? Number two, why over there he's not sure, and here he is sure that it's stuck into the ground. So in order to understand this, we're going to ask a third question. And the third question is, go to source number 8. And source number 8 is also a pasuk that we just read before. Pasuk Yudalid, the Rabbi just says that one of the things that they have to do in the Mishkan is ve'es menoiras ha'mo'ir, the menorah which gives light, ve'es keileha, and its utensils, ve'es neireiseha, and the neireis, the part that holds the wick with the oil, ve'es shemen ha'mo'ir, and the oil which is going to be used for the menorah. Says Rashi, source number 9, ve'es shemen ha'mo'ir, and the oil that we need for lighting. Ask Rashi a question: why do we need experts to take care of the oil? Everyone knows how to make oil. Why does the Torah say that we need the experts to make the oil? Mainly that we need experts to make the menorah, of course, but we need experts for the oil. Says Rashi, yes. Avhu tzarich chachmei leiv. Also, the oil needs experts, talented people. Why? Shehu meshuna mish'ar shmanim. Because the oil used for the menorah is a different type of oil. It's different than all types of oil. As the Gemara explains in Menachos and Daf, Pei Vav Amud Aleph, it's attracted in the Gemara, Menachos, that what? That megargeroi bereish hazayis vehu kosis v'zach. The Gemara over there, not going to go now through all the details, but the Gemara over there says that there are 3 levels of oil. Within the 3 levels, each level has 3 levels of oil. In other words, we have 9 levels of purity in oil. For the menorah, we needed the most pure, the purest possible. So as soon as some of the olives were ripe, they would take those olives, the first ones that are ripe, squeeze them a little bit, and the first few drops, this is what was used for the menorah. Which means that this oil was so pure that there was absolutely no sediment whatsoever. So therefore, it's something which needs chachmei leiv. It's something that needs expertise, talent. So the question comes up over here, wait a minute. You're telling me that all the things over here need talent. That's why the Rabbi says them here. To make ropes, to take a peg and stick it into the ground, you need talent. Everyone knows how to do that. Anybody who puts up a tent, you just stick it into the ground. What's the big deal? Why do we need chachmei leiv? Why do we need talented people to take ropes and pegs and stick them into the ground? Therefore, we're going to see now something unbelievable in this psukim. And I'm just going to give a little example. When someone goes through a big operation, so he takes the best surgeon. When the surgeon has to make this operation, let's say a heart bypass or whatever it may be, the surgeon doesn't do it all himself. The surgeon has a whole team of people working with him. And first comes an anesthesiologist, and then comes the people who do the opening of the skin, and then finally the surgeon comes and he does the tough part of the operation. But once the tough part of the operation is done, then the rest of the team does what's called the finishing touches. And I noticed that there are some doctors, some clinics, that they advertise that we do also the finishing touches, which means that not everybody does it. Because the finishing touches, that's already something that anybody can do. And we find this also by sculptures, that the little details, the fine details, they could take any of their students to do. The big part of the job, that is the sculptor himself does. Therefore, comes the Torah over here and says that here by the Mishkan was different. What was different here? Now it's going to be something beautiful. Look at source number 10. It says that this is taken from the Likutei Sichos over here in Garelik Lamed Aleph in volume 31. Ulataret zeh mefarish Rashi. Rashi is coming here to take out a question. Why is it that we need the chachmei leiv to take the ropes and the pegs? If you're telling me that we need them to make the crochet, to put together the curtains, yeah, it's true, because that's take craft. But just to tie them down, you don't need that. Says Rashi, yes. Rashi, what the Torah wants to tell us, that the pegs was a integral part of the actual curtains. Because without the pegs, then the curtains would sway in the wind. So it's understood. The kiven shachachmei leiv hayutzrichim lases is because the chachmei leiv, these talented people, had to make the curtains. They didn't suffice themselves. They weren't content just to do the main part of the curtains. Ella gamru oison beoifen shetiyeno davar shalem bechol protov. They finished it in such a way that it should be a complete thing, everything. Vehainu, which means she'asu, that they made loirak es gufa yerius, not only the actual curtains. Elogam es kol kraseyen. They also took all the clamps, ve'adli yeseidos umesarim, and also the pegs and the ropes, shehutzrechu lekashram shelo yonu baruach, that they had to tie them down, that the yerius shouldn't move. Because if the yerius move, that is not proper. That is not the final touch to the yerius. The yerius have to be part of a structure of the Mishkan. And now comes the punchline regarding Rashi. Val pizen, according to this, yesh Levi ratam. Now we can understand sherashi medayikan shayish seides hayu liskoya. Here Rashi comes to say that what was the pegs for? To stick them into the ground. Dehainu shayutkuim bekarka, that they were stuck into the ground. Veloirak tluyin, that not they were just hanging. Vekoivdon machbichilu pula hayirias, and their weight kept down the yerias. Why? By sticking them, by saying that they were stuck into the ground, there is more stressed the concept that they are an integral part of the structure of the yerias. When I say that this is just something hanging, it's a separate thing. When I say that it's stuck into the ground, now it's all one thing. Because through them, the yerias are connected into the ground, and now it's one entity. However, if we explain it, if we say that the pegs were just a weight, then the pegs are something additional to the yerias. In other words, we have yerias, and in order they shouldn't move, so I have a weight sitting there. But it's not actually part of the yerias. If I say that the pegs were in the ground, so now I have one entity, which is the yerias, with the strings, with the pegs, all one into the ground. Perhaps because if we say that it was a weight, it's sort of like an outside force holding them. It's not part of the yerias. If it's in the ground, it's one. Perhaps a typical example would be the mitzvah, for example, by mezuzah. What's the mitzvah mezuzah? Likboya mezuzah. The mezuzah should be affixed on the door. What happens if somebody will take a mezuzah and he'll hold it? He'll hold it like this with his hand. The mezuzah can't move. Is that considered affixing? No. Because my holding it is an outside force to the mezuzah. It's not that the mezuzah is holding itself into the door. It's something else holding it. If I take a nail and stick it in, then the mezuzah becomes part of the door. And the same thing over here. If they were going to be using weights, the weights are not part of the yerias. It's something outside of the yerias and just keeps them down. But if I stick it into the ground, it becomes like one structure. And this is why the Chachmei Lev, they wanted to make their full job a yerias that stands straight. That's why, what did they do? They did also the finishing touch, which is sticking in the pegs into the ground, because now they finished the job. So someone may ask, wait a minute. So who says that they had to finish it? The main thing is to make the yerias, but even if it's not stuck into the ground, let someone else do it. Why did the Chachmei Lev have to do it? Comes the Rebbe and says that Torah is sending us an unbelievable message here. What's the message? Go to source number 11. Says the Rebbe over here in Likutei Sichos. Umikan hayro lechachmei lev, and from here is a lesson to all the talented, the wise-hearted people, the Chachmei Lev, shebechol doir v'doir ba'avodas hachinuch, that are in every single generation who are involved in, what does a Chacham do? What is the job of a Chacham? To teach other people, educate. As we're going to see in a minute, on these Chachamim is compelled the obligation to put up many students. Kipsaka Rambam, as the Rambam makes it very clear, the Rambam in Hilchas Talmud Torah, shemitzvah al kol chacham v'chacham mi Yisrael. It's a mitzvah on every single chacham of the Yidden, lelamed es kol hatalmidim, to teach anybody who he can, students, afal pi she'einam banav, even though they're not his children. And how does someone teach? Says the Rebbe, she'ein milui chayvasa shel hachacham. The obligation of the chacham doesn't mistayim bekach, doesn't finish with the fact the job doesn't finish by just teaching. I have students, I teach them the material, and that's it. No, this is not how you teach according to Chachmei Lev, according to the Chacham. How do you do it? Continues the Rebbe. He has to be a true Chacham Lev according to the Torah. What's a true Chacham Lev? Lidoig, he has to make sure that the students that he produces, that he develops, they should be complete students. What does that mean? That even those details that seem to be marginal, superficial, just like the ropes and the pegs, that seemingly they don't need to be done by experts. He makes sure that the student should have even these details perfect, which means that he doesn't just teach the material to the kid, to the student. He makes sure that the student internalizes it properly until he has everything 100% clear, and now he is stuck in the ground. He is very well knowledged in the material. Davke when the teacher finishes the putting up the student till the last details, even the ones that seem to be superficial, then then we have the security and assurance that this is something which is everlasting, it is strong, that he is not going to be swayed by the winds. Which winds? That also when there are chas v'shalom, there are winds out there which are not very positive. The Talmid stands steadfast on his post, Rabbi, and he follows the directives of his teacher. In accordance to the directives of his teacher, then when the student is very strong in his understanding of what the Talmud, of what the teacher told him, then we know that what the teacher taught is actually penetrated the student properly. To the extent that there's not a single detail that didn't penetrate the student. And the Rebbe says over here a very cute word. This is sort of like what the Alter Rebbe said on the certain pasuk. It says about Avraham Avinu, Eikev asher shama Avraham bekoili. Because Avraham Avinu listened to me. What does it mean, Eikev? Eikev could mean that Avraham Avinu, because Avraham Avinu listened. Eikev also comes from the word akvaim. Akvaim means the heel. What does it mean, the heel? Avraham Avinu shama tziva shemizborech, that Avraham Avinu listened, internalized the command of Hashem, bechol tziur koima shaloi, in his whole being, not only with his roish, with his intellect, and not only with his guf, with his body, with his emotions, regel, even in his foot, shegam ha'akvayim shaloi, that even eikev asher sham Avram bekoil, even the heel of Avram Avinu, of the foot, shamu, he internalized the tzivuya of the Eibishter. Which means that even the superficial details, the marginal details, all have to be permeated with Hashem's words. And now we will understand why the Chachmei Lev did also these little details till the finishing of the job. Why? This is what the Chachamim hint to us. She'ein ha-mitzvah nikras elo al shem ha-goimra. That a mitzvah is considered. Who gets the credit for a mitzvah? The one who does the finished touches to the mitzvah. And actually, it's a Rashi in Chumash, in Parsha Vayakhel. Rashi says over there, he brings a pasuk from Tanakh, where it says that the bones that the Yidden brought out from Mitzrayim, the bones of Yosef, that the Yidden brought out from Mitzrayim, they buried in wherever they buried Yosef in Shechem. So all the Mefarshim ask, what do you mean the bones that the Yidden took out of Mitzrayim? The bones were taken out by Moshe Rabbeinu, not by the Yidden. The Yidden buried Yosef, but who took out the bones? The Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim. So all the Mefarshim say that it's true, Moshe Rabbeinu took it. But who finished the job? The Yidden. So therefore the whole mitzvah is considered as if the Yidden did it. Says the Rebbe over here also, that even if the main part of the thing was done, of the project, and you need only one more little detail to finish it, since the whole mitzvah was not finished yet, it's as if the mitzvah wasn't done. The one who finishes the mitzvah, even though he finished that tiny little detail, the whole mitzvah is called on his name. This is like what we said before, until we don't have the whole job. It's not that there's one little detail missing. Through this, everything is missing. Because we are not sure. Because we are not sure that this is going to be able to withstand all the winds that are going to blow on it. And that's why we needed this to penetrate the thing until the final details. And that is why the Chachmei Lev didn't only do the Yerias, which seems to be the biggest part of the job. It's true, it's the biggest part. But who does the final touch that the Yerias should be part of the structure and that they don't move? Whoever puts in the pegs. So the Chachmei Lev said, we are the ones who are going to do that to finish the whole job, because that's who gets the whole mitzvah. So now comes the punchline, source number 12, says the Rebbe, Umizeh gam idud godel. And from here also comes a big inspiration and encouragement l'dereinu zeh, for our generation. Doro de ikvese de Mashiach, the generation of ikvese de Mashiach. Ikvese, the heel of Mashiach. In other words, we are the last generation, starting from 5,700 years ago. We are the last generation, like the heel of the foot. Even though we are in a level of heel, in comparison to the previous generations, and the generations are not getting any better. Dafke, our job, our work that we do in the refining of the last details, be'akvayim, in the heel at the end, just like the pegs which are on the bottom of the curtains, the dafke through the pegs, this is where they get connected into the ground. This is what finishes the job, which is needed to bring the Geula, which is going to come through Mashiach. Although there's only a detail. And especially when we look at the previous generations, they were big tzaddikim, they really did the job. What we do comparison to them is very little, but it's the end. It's the finishing touches. And by the way, a very interesting point. The Rebbe's first Maimer, the Rebbe's first discourse, Basi Lagani, what does the Rebbe talk about? That all the generations, they did what they did, but the last generation, what do? We take the Shechin of the Eibishter and we bring it into the ground, which is exactly the same words over here. That what's the whole idea of the Yerias? To stick them into the ground, and then the job is finished. So the Rebbe finishes off, Ve'ein ha-mitzvah nikras elo al shem ha-goimra. The mitzvah is called, who gets the credit? For the one who finishes it. Who finishes it? Hadoir de ikvese de Mashiach. The generation of the heel of Mashiach, Shehu HaGoymer Maseinu V'Avedoseinu Shel Kol Zman Meshach HaGolus, that he, this generation, is the one that finishes the work of Golus, Umevi Bepoyel Tachlis Ashleimus Shel Yemeis HaMashiach Utchias HaMesim, and it brings down in an actual way the concept of the days of Mashiach and the resurrection of the dead. Bimheira B'yameina Mamish. So now we understand why Rashi makes it a very important point to say that what happened with the pegs and the rope. In Parshat Truma, it discusses the concept that the Rebbe said he wants yeriyos and he wants pegs and ropes. But over there, it's not important exactly how it's going to happen, this way or that way. The Chachmei Lev, when they are coming now to do it, they say, what do you mean? We are going to finish the job. And the way to finish the job is by sticking them into the ground. And because they wanted to have the whole mitzvah, that's what they did also the finishing touches. So, now we can understand this zettel of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Why did he cherish what we said in the beginning of the class? This zettel, where the Rebbe Rashab says to take in this child. Because as the previous Rebbe explains, there was a whole system of the yeshiva, how to put up Talmidim. They became the canon, and they became the soldiers that took over the world after that. But there was this little kid who was left on the side, and the marginal, there wasn't a place for him. And the Rebbe Rashab came and said, no, when is this yeshiva Tomchet Mimi, when is it complete? When you also have the marginal pins, the ones which are on the bottom. And that is why my assumption is that the previous Rebbe cherished this, because this is the strongest message that we could send, that we have to take care also of the little details, because that is our job in our generation. And that's why it says, B'negeh to Mashiach, and a lot of people ask, the Rebbe sent shluchim all over the world. So I understand if you take a shliach and you send him to a town where there's 100,000 Jews, 500,000 Jews, and he could turn over the place. But why send him to a place where there's very few Yidden? There are some shluchim that for 20 years they have no minyan there. What's the logic over here? To take a family and then put them in such a situation? The answer is very simple. We're not here just to bring Yidden back to their roots. We are here to prepare the way for Mashiach. What does it say by Mashiach? And the Rashi brings it also in Chumash later in Dvarim, that the Rebbe says in Yeshaya, "Ve'atem teluktu le'echad echad b'nei Yisrael." The Rebbe, when Mashiach comes, is going to go and take every single Yid and bring him back to where he belongs. Which means that the moment there's a whole group, it's not called le'echad echad, it doesn't have to take each one separately. When Mashiach is going to come, every single one, even somebody who's in a very far corner, the Rebbe is going to take him. That is why we are now in a time when, of course, there are big things to be done, but let's not forget the details. There's one Jew, we meet him on a plane. Ask him, did you put on tefillin today? And you could think, there are 14 million Jews, who cares if this Yid puts on tefillin? No, it's not so. Every single Yid is important. This is what the Rashi is telling us in our parsha. And not only that, you never know. Could be that one action of putting on tefillin with this one person is what's going to tip the scale of the whole world. And therefore, when we are going to deal with this world in a way of ve'atem to look to le'echad echad, that every single person is important, no matter how marginal he is, we will be zeicha through all our avodah, that we're going to have the revelation of Mashiach, and we're going to witness the ve'atem to look to le'echad echad, how the Rebbe is going to gather all the Yidden and bring us back into Eretz Yisrael, into the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, Teikef Umiyad Mamash.